Our next and final conversation of the day is with, again, the amazing Tom Philpott. And he's going to have a chat with someone I consider a friend, a mentor, and a revolutionary, Raj Patel. So the stage is yours, my friends. You can come on out. Please.
Thank you, Ben.
You're good. Thank you. Did I come off like a bad white person?
So here we are again, Raj. I was just thinking about when I first met you. I believe it was 2009, and we were in.
The moon was out. The stars were shining bright.
I don't know where I left my water.
Yes, indeed. But we were in this moment of there was a spike in commodity prices, things like wheat and rice and corn. That had happened a couple of years before. It had a couple more years to go. You had just published Stuffed and Starved, and you were working on, you were doing a lot of work on the way that these price increases reverberate through the global South in this kind of industrialized sort of global food system we have. And I think there's always a bit of a shock doctrine moment when this happens, because the idea is, oh, if we can just increase yields and grow more food and use more pesticides and use more fertilizers and flood the market, then the price will come down and everything will be fine. And of course, the price does come down, but we still have incredibly high rates of global poverty and hunger, and the ecological degradation just continues apace. And so we had our boom, and then we went through our bust, and now suddenly, because of this war, we're right back into a period of super high prices. Russia and Ukraine combined are responsible for almost 30% of global wheat exports. They are thrown into chaos. We're seeing wheat prices at, I'm pretty sure, historic highs beyond what happened in 2012-ish era. And I wonder what sort of thoughts you're having as someone who's thought about a lot about this topic, about this moment and what it means for the food justice movement to be back in this kind of high commodity situation.
Well, I mean, it's made worse, as you've written about in Mother Jones, by climate change. And I mean, it's not surprising that essentially on the day of, the first day of the war, the American Energy Institute is essentially reprising drill, baby, drill.
I think it was the day before the war started, actually.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, and exactly, as you've observed, no crisis goes to waste for the energy industry. And the problem with that, of course, is that the energy industry creates climate change. And I mean, I remember this story in 2010. Bear with me, it's going to take a second just to run through this huge arc. But, I mean, in 2010, we had these commodity price spikes, and at the same time, we had a catastrophic fire burning through the wheat fields of Russia. And it was made much more catastrophic because in 2008, the response to the financial crisis was austerity. You'll remember those good old days when the government decided not to print a ton of money and instead just cut back services. And this was a global doctrine, and the Russians did it. And so they cut back their firefighting service. And so, and also in order to raise money for the treasury, they sold access to large parts of forest areas that were then deforested. And so when these fires start, first of all, there's lots more kindling and lots more to burn on the ground because the forests have essentially been denuded, and there are no firefighters. And so what is already a sort of once in 500-year weather event that causes a drought that then causes a catastrophic fire is made worse because climate change isn't just weather. It's also the interaction of weather with social systems, and in this case, capitalism. So the fire burns in Russia. And what does the commodity industry do? Well, there's a meeting in Zurich with a company called Glencore, one of the world's largest grain traders. The representative from Glencore goes to the Russian embassy and says, hey, Russians, if you stop exporting grain, you'll be able to feed everyone, because right now there's a global there's a price spike for you in Russia. If you stop exporting grain, that's more grain for you. Don't you worry your pretty heads about what's happening in the rest of the world. At least people in Russia will get fed. 2 days later, Russia institutes a grain export ban. The global price of grain goes up, and all of a sudden you start seeing food riots. And you see food riots in Mozambique. And this is odd, because wheat doesn't grow anywhere near Mozambique. Why does Mozambique have a food price riot for grain? It's because of colonialism. It's because the Portuguese come to Mozambique, install Portuguese and Portuguese tastes, and make it normal to want bread on your plate every day, and that a day without bread is now no longer normal. And this is a colonial crop, and it becomes inculcated in society to render it normal. And so all of a sudden, you have bread riots in a country that doesn't grow its own bread, that depends on Russian wheat imports. But the price has gone up. And then, because there was austerity, the government hadn't been buying enough rubber bullets, and so they used live ammunition, and 11 people were killed in a bread riot. So that arc, right, this is about colonialism, it's about capitalism, it's about climate change, it's about the weather, it's about grain, it's about oil, and here we are again. 12 years later, and that tragedy is being repeated as a deeper tragedy, because again, it's a global problem, and one in which we can fully see what's going to happen, and yet it will happen anyway. I mean, and that's the definition of tragedy. You can see every bad decision foretold, and yet, like Cassandra, here we are, screaming into the wind.
Yeah, and so the response in 2000, in that period, I mean, this period of high prices lasted, there were spikes in it, roughly 2008 to 2013. How did governments respond to it, and how did social movements respond to it? How has the deck been reshuffled since then as we, I mean, I feel like I woke up one morning and saw the price of corn go from something like $4 a bushel, where it's been for a long time, to $7.50. And the last time it hit that point, there were tortilla riots in Mexico, because a lot of people in Mexico get a lot of their calories from corn, and suddenly they can get priced out of their staple. So how has the deck been reshuffled? How do you see it going this time? And what are the opportunities for social movements to counteract the shock doctrine of we have to drill more, we have to spray more pesticides, we have to use more fertilizer, even though the price of fertilizer has spiked beyond imagination as well, because Russia and Ukraine are also very involved in the natural gas business, which is tied to nitrogen fertilizer. Where do you see the opportunities here?
Honestly, I think things are worse this time round, because the soft left, I mean, in other parts of the world, the Obama administration would be on the right, but here they're on the left. And that administration shat on social movements so comprehensively. It ignored the demands that were being, that came from grassroots movements for transformative justice. And so you had essentially a reimposition of neoliberalism from the center left. And that means that there's a whole swath of the population that feels entirely correctly betrayed. And in that moment, you've got the openings and the rise of the possibility of the far right. And so, whereas in the last crisis there was a moment for social movements mobilizing, and governments, and going through the work of building grassroots movements and petitioning government, and governments turning around and essentially selling out the working class. It's not surprising that now the working class sees its future in authoritarianism. And look at India, for example. We had this fantastic farmers' movement, right? It was able to reverse Modi's 3 laws and was able to send Modi packing. And yet, who just won the election in the most populous state but Narendra Modi? And that shows that there is a success that the right has had, both in corroding the institutions of democracy themselves, but also in claiming the space for transformation that should give us all pause, because in the midterms, the bloodbath is, again, easy to see, but the greater worry is in the next election, and the politics that emerge after that, no matter who wins, are going to be fairly dark in this country and concomitantly around the world. What do you see?
I feel like this moment has come upon us so fast. Like, I don't think that many people, I mean, I know that there was a lot of talk about this invasion happening, but I think that the way that it went was such a shock that it was A, so aggressive, and B, that the resistance was so great that we are spiraling. I mean, all I can say is that I was in New York, in Brooklyn, and watched the towers tumble in 2001. And when I saw that, I said to myself, I don't know what the fuck is going on right now, but what I do know is that everything is different now. We are in a new phase that's chaotic. I used to cover finance. I used to cover, sort of Wall Street finance. And I could remember where I was, I think it was 2007. I was farming and writing about food politics. I wasn't in that world anymore, but watching the news as this financial crisis plays out. And when Lehman Brothers vanished from the face of the earth, again, this was incomprehensible, it was impossible, and yet it happened, and I thought to myself, it took a couple of years for the crisis to fully play out, but everything's different now. We're in a different era, and I think that we're in such a moment right now, where global geopolitics are shifting, shock doctrine, the sort of Naomi Klein concept of people in power using crisis to reinforce the status quo. It's happening at a speed that is breakneck, like literally before the war started. This announcement comes out, and you can already feel agribusiness, global agribusiness, realizing that it's got a moment here, and that its idea of, hey, if the scarcity mentality, if commodity prices are really high, then the thing to do is produce more food. And I wrote a book about how the two most important farming regions in the United States and in the world, most productive, are the San Joaquin Valley of California and the Midwestern Corn Belt. And both of these places are in a fairly advanced stage of ecological unraveling. And this moment brings the companies that control these areas that dominate the workers, that mistreat the workers, that are spoiling the ecologies of those places. It gives them the chance to say, hey, we need more of the same. And I think, I don't know where it's going, I don't know what the answer is, but I think the big challenge is figuring out ways to counteract that and to refocus on creating economies of solidarity and of justice, and to sort of, take the opportunity as aggressively as the people in power are. There's some differences, like they have literally trillions of dollars in assets that they're defending, and that throws off billions of dollars in funds to push their agenda. But I think that, I'm not saying that I have the answer, but, people coming together and fighting in coalition and with solidarity as a sort of main principle, building out opportunities. Because, the same, I believe it was the day the war started or the day after the war started, the IPCC came out with that report talking about the UN's climate council came out with this report saying just how far things have unraveled and just how short the window is to move things in a new direction. Meanwhile, the world's exploding around us.
So, we've got about 3.5 minutes left, and I want to ask you the question I always get asked. So, are you hopeful then?
The only thing that I can say, the thing that sort of the quote that haunts me is Kafka scribbling in his notebooks. Kafka, writing not long before the Holocaust, writing, I believe, in the 1920s in the Austro-Hungarian world of Prague. His sister ended up perishing dying in the Holocaust, and he scribbles in his notebooks, "There's hope, but not for us." In other words, that there isn't a lot of hope in the short term, but I think there is hope if the work that I was just talking about happens, that there can be a better future. But I don't feel like in my adult lifetime I've seen more kind of threats out there. How about you?
I mean, given the amazing people who've been on this stage today,
Yes.
I'm reminded that hope is something you do. And it is the result that it's something you earn. It's something that it doesn't come free. It's not the sort of thing you wear on a T-shirt and ask former President Obama to put on Netflix for you. It's the sort of thing that you have to fight for. And there have been so many fighters on the stage today that it's important to remember that to say there is no hope is to betray is to betray that work. And I'm not going to do that, and neither. I mean, it's like crossing a picket line to say, well, you can try unionizing or fighting for fair food, but ultimately we're all going to burn. I'm not there, not yet.
Yeah, and if you...
But I mean, I do. I mean, this idea of sort of pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will is important. But it's also important to remember this is difficult work, particularly in the global south. And I do want, before we close, just to remind us that internationalism has always been part of this idea of solidarity. Sometimes, particularly in the United States, we forget that. And particularly when you look at the media representations of Ukraine, you always see there is a sort of racialized representation of, well, these are the civilized people who are fighting each other now. I do want us to remember that there are people all the time who put their bodies on the line so that we can have hope. And I want to just name one who was killed 2 days ago, a comrade in the South African shack dwellers movement, who was killed while he was laying irrigation pipe in an urban farm in Ekahana. I mean, Ayande Ngila is his name, and he's part of the South African shack dwellers movement. And he was killed by ANC thugs who, the government has become fairly pernicious there and is fighting against social movements. But the social movement fights on, and that cooperative and that community is a beacon for the kinds of world that I would like to see. And as are some of the movements we've seen on stage here today. And so I'm grateful for them, and grateful for his sacrifice. And the only way to honor it is to keep fighting.
Yeah, and along those lines, when I start to feel a little overwhelmed by world events, one of the things that I can think about that gives me comfort is the work of someone of a coalition that was here on the stage today, and that's Gerardo Reyes of Coalition of Immokalee Workers. Because, we're in this, we look out in this situation, all this bleak stuff happening, there's war, there's shock doctrines happening just disgustingly before our eyes. But farm workers in South Florida or Middle Florida picking tomatoes, they face that thing, this sort of thing in a very concrete way on a daily basis. And the patience with which the CIW has just kept moving along, one battle at a time, is incredibly inspiring. And over the years, vicious attacks from Burger King or Walmart or these various powers that be, and I just sit back going, you'll be signing on that dotted line before too long, and they always do, because this is an incredibly patient. They don't have that sort of activist impatient where I went to the picket line and it didn't change, so I'm not going back again. And I also want to shout out someone else who has just up here that has given me a lot of inspiration. That's Magali Lechile of Venceremos. And there is another group that faces catastrophe on a daily basis. People working on poultry lines, incredibly brutal conditions there, and just harnessing worker power in a right to work state, and sticking it to this giant corporation, once again with great patience. Both of these groups continue doing their work, continue needing support, and that is the kind of thing that does give me hope. Just sort of watching them, reporting on them, is something that, for all the horrible stuff that I write about, having groups like that out there doing work, it's what keeps me going. And I think we're past our time. Our 15 minutes of fame our 15 minutes of infamy is spent.
You went over time, Tom, but thank you for ending on thank you for ending on a hopeful note. And I want to reiterate something Raj Patel said: hope is something you do, and people are putting their bodies on the line every day for a better food system all around the world. So thank you both very much.